Elizabeth Warren. You ready? Okay, hey, welcome back. This will probably be our last video, and what we're going to do is talk about this crowding out quiz, which I sent in your papers, and we're going to walk through this step by step. And again, let me get this straight on the screen. I'm frozen, hold on. No, it's the fault of the camera over here. There we go. Back on. Okay, so we're going to walk through this step by step. But basically what you have to understand through crowding out is that the Fed, or Feds, cause our interest rate to rise, and that causes private investment to decline. And so not a good thing for the overall health of the economy. Yeah, we have to go through times where this happens, but we hope that it goes away because, again, the government does not create the jobs, individuals create the jobs. So if the private investment has been pushed out, the future, and go back to your production possibility curve, is going to contract. We just won't have the plants or equipment or education or technology to move forward. So here we go. We're going to go through this step by step. Bonds in monetary policy. So if we're talking about monetary policy, you are talking about the Federal Reserve Bank. Or, as you'll see it in your test questions, the central bank. If the economy is suffering from a recession, they want to put money in. So what will they do? The Fed will buy. Remember, put equals buy. This will move money from the government to the public. On the money graph, show the change. Well, what's going to happen? And again, you've got your interest rates and your quantity of money, demand. What's going to happen if the Fed is buying bonds? They are going to be pushing this curve out. So on the money market graph, or on the money, the money market graph, that line's going to create, will shift out. And if it shifts out, here's my interest, here's my new interest. And this will create lower. Remember, there's more of it. If there's more of anything, it usually becomes cheaper. And that will help IG, because when interest rates go down, private investment goes up. And this will improve aggregate demand. Why? Because if private investment's going up, people are getting paid. They're getting money. They get to spend that money. They're going to want the new house. They're going to want the new car. They're going to want to take the vacation. The kids are going to get to buy the clothes they want to buy. That all works together. All right. If the economy, now we're talking about fiscal policy. So fiscal policy is Congress. Remember, monetary policy is the central bank or the Fed. Fiscal policy is Congress. So if the economy is suffering from a recession, Congress will do what to taxes? Well, they're not going to raise them because that's going to take money out and make it worse. So they will lower your taxes. And another option they have is to increase government spending. So they can either give the money to you by lowering your taxes so you have more take-home pay, or they can increase their government spending, which is going to create more jobs for that instance. And this policy will increase consumption and government spending. And again, go back to your cigarettes are bad expenditure model of GDP. However, it's assumed this policy will affect the federal budget. Of course it will. If government's spending more than they're taking in, they're going to create a deficit. So their income is going to fall due to the tax decrease and the expenditure increase, and then they have a deficit. Okay. If they have a deficit, they're going to have to sell bonds to make that up. Why? Because selling bonds takes. And by the way, these are not already outstanding issue bonds. These are new issue bonds. This is the government saying, hey, we're going to now float $20 billion in bonds. Well, who buys those bonds? A lot of people do, and a lot of investment portfolios do. So don't confuse this with the Fed buying and selling what's already out there. This is brand new money being created. Okay. Now, if the monetary actions, we're going to go to the money market graph here again. Excuse me. Okay. So what's going to happen here? They're going to either move the supply or the demand line. That was the graph we talked about earlier. And when Congress causes this line to move, if they're going to be selling or issuing new money, this curve is going to move out. And we're going to talk about the demand curve. Why? Because they're demanding what's happening, and that causes our interest rate to increase. Now, if we move into the loanable funds graph, and I know they all look very similar, but we have our quantity of loanable funds, our interest rate, our demand for loanable funds, and our supply of loanable funds. So, what is deficit spending going to do? Well, we can do this one of two ways. We can say it's going to increase demand, right, because we need people working. Or the deficit spending is going to contract the money supply because they've got to pay the salaries and whatnot, and they're taking money out of the loanable funds. So either demand is going to shift out or supply is going to shift in. Either way, it doesn't matter. And we talked about that in the prior lesson when I put those two graphs side by side. Either way, it doesn't matter. Interest rates will increase. And that is the part that's bad for the private economy. So higher interest rates will cause, and it says investment demand, but be aware you're talking about the IG component on the GDP expenditure model. It'll cause the investment demand to decrease. And there it is, repeated one more time. And then if the private supply line is shown, I would omit 17. It really isn't going to come up, and it muddies the water a little bit. So the initial fiscal policies increase consumer and government demand and causes our demand to shift outward. However, the reduction of capital investments will ultimately cause the demand curve to shift inward because we don't have the private jobs being provided anymore. People will be buying less. And Keynesians, again, I don't think they're going to get into the individual economists, but Keynes is one that comes up, and he thinks that the short run is more important than the long run. Basically, he said, you have to fix the problem now, the long run will take care of itself. So again, keep in mind this crowding out really affects the investment demand and private investment. I want to take just a moment and work a couple problems with you. And then I think that's going to be it. After that, you've got a review to go through, which you have the key to. And then you have some questions that were released, free response, and then your test. And you have the keys to all of those. So if you have questions over any of that, you can text me. Next week, I will send out by email and also remind. So again, if you're getting an email and then a remind from me, they're the exact same information. You only have to click on one of them. But I'll be sending out the AP test, the practice test. I'll send those out, and then I'll send out keys to go with them. We should have probably 3 weeks of those, so there'll be a test every single week. Multiple choice and free response, and it will just make you stronger as you move into that test. So here we go. By the way, this would be an example of a short question, which there's going to be one long question and one short question. So here's a short question. Labor productivity is output per unit of labor, and an increase in labor productivity is a source of economic growth. Identify two sources of increase in labor productivity. Assume that a country's economy is at full employment and productivity has been rising. Use a correctly labeled graph of aggregate demand and supply to show the long-run effect of the growth in productivity on output and price level. And then C, assume the economy produces only two goods, X and Y. Use a production possibility diagram and show the increase in the labor productivity. So what would cause labor productivity to increase? Well, it's not just more people. Again, go back to, we could have a flood of immigrants, yay, which when we left last time, we were saying that is not a bad thing because our unemployment rate at that point was so low. But they have to be what? They have to be educated and they have to speak the language. They have to be able to communicate, whether it's our language or the language that they're working in. It doesn't matter, but they have to be educated. They have to have some technology savvy to get through. So labor productivity can come from a variety of sources, but one of those sources is going to be education. And again, we go back to, that is why when you get out of school and start working for real, a lot of your employers will offer you the chance to earn your bachelor's degree, earn your master's degree, and they'll pay for quite a bit of that because the more education you have, the more productive you are as a worker. So education. Another source could be an increase in technology. Okay, so it only asks for two, but I'm going to add another one. There could be better production methods. And I think the most simple example of that would be, let's go back to farming. Farming 150 years ago was, difficult. You didn't have big, huge farms like you do today. Why? Because the production methods have increased so much. The technology driving the combines and the harvesters has grown tremendously. So now you need way fewer people to harvest and farm land than you used to, which is why you've got these mega farms out there now. Okay, if you have another idea and you want to ask me, feel free to text that in. It will not be, just realize it will not be increase in population. That will never be an acceptable answer. Because again, let's just say that, 1 million of us move to, I don't know, pick a country, any country you want. We don't speak the language. We're not educated in their society. We don't understand their work methods. We're not going to be very productive right at first. It's not until we get assimilated into their system that we will start to be productive. So just increasing the population does not increase your productivity. So be careful there. All right, 2. Assume that a country's economy is at full employment. Productivity is rising. Use a graph of demand and supply. So we're going to start off with that, and they're talking about productivity and economy. So I'm going to draw my GDP and my price level, and I've got aggregate demand, aggregate supply, equilibrium quantity, and equilibrium price. If you leave any of those items off, you won't get credit, but if you put them all on, you'll get at least 1 point for that. Oh, and this will probably be a 5-point question, so that's substantial. So, show the long-run effect of growth in productivity on output. And they're asking us, and this is what gets a little tricky, they're asking us for the long-run effect of productivity. So when I see that, here's my demand and supply curve, but when they throw that long run in there, I'm going to put in my long run aggregate supply curve also. And remember that intersects at your equilibrium quantity. Because there's 2 trains of thought. One is that there's a finite number of things you can make with the PPC that you have, and then it would be a vertical line, and the other is that it's a curved line. But when they throw long run in there, I'm going to put this in there just to be sure. It can't hurt to do it, and it could help you if you need it. So they're asking us for the effect of the output. So I don't care which curve you shift, whether it's the short run supply or the long run, but let me get a different color pen. But we definitely want to shift one of our curves, and because they say long run, I'm going to make it the long run curve shifting out, which gives me, of course I get the one that's out of ink, which gives me an increase in my equilibrium quantity and a decrease in my overall price structure. So you've answered the question right there. The long run effect, my output has increased, my price level has decreased. Okay. All right, C, assume that the economy, I'm sorry, let me back up here. The shorter your answers, the better. The economics readers don't really want to hear what you have to say, and I don't mean that as a criticism, but the shorter and sweeter your answer is, the more they like that. They're not going to read through your answer to determine whether you are right or not. They're going to want to see your graph, see the shift, move on. They don't even ask for full sentences, so there you go. Assume the economy produces two goods, X and Y. Use a correctly labeled production possibility. So they're not telling me what I have to put where, and I am going to assume what? That it is, I'm going to go ahead and bow this curve. And I've got good X over here, and they're not being specific what to put where, so it doesn't matter. And I've got good Y here. And the reason I'm using a bowed curve is because they don't make any indication that there's a one-for-one trade-off here. It's not like they only make, again, cakes and donuts. I'm assuming an economy that's not one-for-one trade-off. Show the effect of the increase in labor productivity. So we are shifting this aggregate supply curve out, which means we're not moving on the curve, because to move on the curve means we're just as productive as we were when we produced here. We're just as productive as we produced there. So if I move on the curve, that's not showing higher productivity. What I'm going to have to do is shift the entire curve out and have new levels of production for good X and new levels of production for good Y. Easy peasy. That's it. Okay, let's go on to the 2007 question. And again, you've got these keys. You can refer to them if you need to. All right, 2007. This is a little bit longer question. This could look like what our long question's going to be. Although, as I'm reading through it, the Federal Reserve has targeted Fed funds, defined Fed funds. The Federal Reserve wants to lower the rate, open market operations. They're not getting into different topics, so this will be a short question. This wouldn't be your 10-point question. Okay, in recent years, the Federal Reserve has made targeting the Fed funds rate its main focus. First of all, can they do that? Do they even have control over the Fed funds rate? Well, yes, they do, because the Federal Reserve sets the reserve requirement, the Fed funds, the Fed funds is where they're going to borrow. Banks are going to borrow from the other banks, but the discount rate is what the Fed sets, and by setting that, they set the Fed funds rate, because whatever they're setting the discount rate is what's going to happen to the Fed funds rate. And so they can do this, so we can proceed with this. So define the Fed funds rate, and that is the rate banks borrow from each other. Of course, the classic mistake there is that students will say the Fed funds rate is the rate that banks borrow from the Fed, and it's not. That's your discount rate. So they're kind of setting you up for failure here because they introduce the question with the Federal Reserve, and they go right into the Fed funds rate, and you're thinking Fed, 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 Fed. Be careful. They're kind of tricky about that. All right, if the Fed wants to lower the Fed funds rate, what open market operation would be appropriate? So they want to lower the Fed funds rate. They want to lower the borrowing rates. Why would they want to do that? Because they want to put money in the system, right? If they lower the rates, banks will be able to lend out more money. Why would they want to put money in the system? Because we must be in some sort of a recessionary period. So if they want to lower it, what FOMC operation? So again, you're not going to say they're going to lower the discount rate. What you're going to say is they want to put money in, therefore the Fed will buy bonds. That's it. That's all I got to say. But there's a lot to that, but that's all your answer has to consist of. So assume that the open market operation you indicated in Part B is equal to $10 million. Okay? If the required reserve ratio is 20%, calculate the change in loans throughout the banking system. Okay, so here we go. We're going to draw our T-chart, right? And what are they doing? They're buying bonds, right? Which gives our bankers, remember we have required reserves, excess reserves, and then bonds down here, and retained earnings. So if they are buying the bonds, let's just say we have 10 million in bonds. I got in too small of a space there. Let's just say we have the $10 million in the bonds and the Fed is buying them. So the bank has now released $10 million in cash that they can start to lend out. So what they're going to do, this money all gets, this 10 million gets lent out, right? And what do people do with that money? Well, they go up to their bank and they put 10 million in their demand deposits. The required reserve is 2 million. The excess reserve will be 8 million. Do we agree? So, now think about this again. If my required reserve is 20%, right? How many times will 20 go into 100? That means my money multiplier is going to be 5. So we can lend out $8 million times the money multiplier of 5. So the banking system can create $40 million. They don't ask you to explain any of that, so if you left all of this out, you'd be fine. All you have to show is $40 million. I need to work through the problem, so I can't do that without writing it down. All right. Indicate the effect of the open market operation that you identified in B on the nominal interest rate. Well, what's going to happen? There's more money coming into the system, so what's going to happen? The price of money is going to go, it doesn't even ask you to explain, so the interest rate is going to go down, it's going to decrease. If there's more of it in the system, the interest rate is going to go down. And assume that the Federal Reserve's action, the Federal Reserve's action results in inflation. And what would be the impact on the open market operation of the real rate of interest? Well, it might lead to some inflation, but that's really not what this question is asking. They're saying the impact of the open market operation. So what's going to happen there, again, more money, the interest rate is going to fall. That one does ask you to explain. So because there's more money in the system. and that's going to create your interest rates going down. And again, that's a little tricky because they say, what if it causes inflation? Well, it probably will. Because again, remember, you're in a business cycle. But what they really are asking you is, what is the immediate impact of that $10 million on the market? Okay. That is it, you guys. That's all I've got. You've got lots of questions. Hang on. Just a second. Okay, so what I've done, I put a variety of question and the answers all through here. Work through them at your convenience. Next week, I'll start putting AP test online, and you can see how you do. And that should be it. Those are all the topics that are going to be covered on the AP test this year. So thanks for your attention, and I hope we see you in May. Okay, y'all have a good day.